the gilded halls of Ravenshollow Palace, where centuries of tradition echo through marble corridors, a single whispered confession would shatter the very foundations of the kingdom of Aldermore. What began as an innocent observation from young Princess Isabella would spiral into a revelation so shocking that it would force Crown Prince Alexander to make the most difficult decision of his life, one that would forever change the royal family and potentially alter the line of succession itself. Behind the ornate doors and beneath the glittering chandeliers, Queen Consort Victoria had been harboring a secret so devastating that when it finally came to light, it would send tremors through the monarchy. The truth had been hiding in plain sight, witnessed by innocent eyes that finally found the courage to speak. But some secrets, once revealed, can never be buried again. This is the story of how a child's honesty exposed a web of deception that reached the very heart of the crown, and how one explosive confrontation would determine whether the royal family could survive the scandal that threatened to destroy everything they had built over generations. The morning sun cast long shadows across the pristine gardens of Ravenshollow Palace as Princess Isabella ran through the hedge maze, her golden curls bouncing with each step. At 8 years old, she possessed the curious spirit that often got her into trouble with the palace staff, but today her innocent wandering would lead to a discovery that would shake the very foundations of the kingdom of Aldermore. Isabella had always been fascinated by the secret passages and hidden corners of the ancient palace. While her tutors expected her to be studying mathematics in the East Wing, she had instead chosen to explore the rarely visited servants' quarters near the palace kitchens. The narrow corridors here were different from the grand hallways she knew so well, darker, more mysterious, and filled with the whispered conversations of the palace staff. As she crept along the dimly lit passage, Isabella heard voices coming from behind a partially open door. She recognized one of them immediately. It was Queen Consort Victoria, her stepmother, speaking in hushed but urgent tones. The other voice belonged to a man Isabella had seen around the palace, but didn't know well. Her childish curiosity getting the better of her, she pressed closer to the door to listen. "The documents must be destroyed completely," Victoria was saying, her usually composed voice filled with tension. "If anyone discovers what really happened during the Thornfield incident, everything we've built will crumble." The man's voice was gravelly and nervous.
"Your Majesty, Lord Blackwood is becoming suspicious."
"He's been asking questions about the missing financial records from that time. What if he pieces everything together?" Isabella's young mind couldn't fully comprehend the weight of what she was hearing, but she understood enough to know that her stepmother was discussing something that shouldn't be shared with others. The word destroyed sent a chill down her spine, and she instinctively stepped back from the door. "Blackwood won't be a problem much longer," Victoria replied coldly. "I've made arrangements. By next month, he'll be transferred to our embassy in the remote islands, far from here, far from any documents or records that might interest him." The conversation continued for several more minutes, with Victoria detailing elaborate plans to move certain files, alter official records, and ensure that key witnesses to something called the Thornfield incident would remain silent. Isabella heard mentions of money, threats, and even darker implications that made her stomach twist with an uncomfortable feeling she couldn't quite name. When footsteps approached the door, Isabella quickly scurried away, her heart pounding as she made her way back to the main palace. She spent the rest of the day in a daze, barely paying attention to her afternoon etiquette lessons or evening dinner conversation. The weight of what she had overheard pressed heavily on her young shoulders. That night, as Isabella lay in her ornate four-poster bed, she stared at the painted ceiling depicting cherubs and clouds, her mind racing with questions. What was the Thornfield incident? Why did Victoria need to destroy documents? And why did her stepmother's voice sound so frightening when she spoke about making Lord Blackwood disappear? Over the following days, Isabella became increasingly observant of Victoria's behavior. She noticed how the Queen Consort would excuse herself from family dinners to take mysterious phone calls, how she would meet with unfamiliar men in dark suits who never stayed for tea, and how she had begun locking certain rooms in the palace that had previously been open. The change in atmosphere was palpable throughout Ravenshollow Palace. Servants whispered more quietly in the corridors, and there was a tension in the air that even the youngest princess could feel. Isabella's father, King Edmund, seemed increasingly distracted and spent long hours locked in his study. Her older brother, Crown Prince Alexander, had become more serious and withdrawn, often skipping family activities to attend urgent meetings with advisors. Isabella tried to continue with her normal routine, but the secret knowledge gnawed at her. During her weekly riding lessons with her favorite instructor, Master James, she found herself distracted and unable to focus on her horse's movements. When her governess, Miss Hartwell, read her bedtime stories about brave princesses and noble knights, Isabella wondered if real-life royalty was as honorable as the fairy tales suggested. The breaking point came 2 weeks later, when Isabella witnessed another troubling scene. While playing hide-and-seek with her ladies-in-waiting in the library wing, she had hidden behind a massive bookshelf when Victoria entered the room with the same mysterious man from before. This time, their conversation was even more disturbing. "The Ashworth family is asking too many questions," the man reported. "They've hired a private investigator to look into their daughter's disappearance during the Thornfield incident. What should we do?" Victoria's response chilled Isabella to the bone. "Handle it the same way we handled the Blackwood problem. Make them understand that some questions are better left unasked. Use whatever methods necessary to ensure their silence." Isabella's hands trembled as she pressed herself further behind the massive leather-bound volumes. The casual way Victoria spoke about silencing people and making problems disappear terrified the young princess. This was not the stepmother who smiled during public appearances and posed for royal portraits. This was someone else entirely, someone dangerous. As the conversation continued, Isabella learnt more disturbing details about the Thornfield incident. Apparently, several years before Victoria had married King Edmund, there had been some kind of accident or incident involving multiple families. People had died or disappeared, and Victoria had somehow been involved in covering up the truth. The financial records the Queen Consort was so desperate to hide apparently contained evidence of payments made to silence witnesses and alter official reports. When Victoria and her accomplice finally left the library, Isabella remained hidden for another hour, too frightened to move. When she finally emerged, her world had fundamentally changed. The stepmother she had grown to love and trust over the past 3 years was revealed to be someone capable of terrible things. The palace that had always felt like a safe haven now seemed filled with dark secrets and hidden dangers. That evening at dinner, Isabella could barely look at Victoria across the elaborate dining table. When the Queen Consort smiled and asked about her day, Isabella's stomach lurched. When Victoria reached over to straighten Isabella's tiara, the young princess had to resist the urge to pull away. The woman sitting at their family table was a stranger wearing her stepmother's face. Crown Prince Alexander seemed to notice his sister's unusual behavior and kept glancing at her with concern throughout the meal. As the eldest child and heir to the throne, Alexander had always been protective of Isabella, and his sharp intelligence meant he rarely missed changes in family dynamics. When Isabella excused herself early from dinner, claiming a headache, Alexander's worried expression followed her out of the room. Later that night, Isabella lay awake wrestling with an impossible decision. She possessed knowledge that felt too heavy for her young shoulders, but she didn't know what to do with it. Should she tell her father, the king? Should she confide in her brother Alexander? Or should she try to pretend she had never heard anything at all? The weight of adult secrets had crashed into her innocent world, and Isabella realized that childhood was ending whether she wanted it to or not. The fairy tales had never prepared her for a reality where the people meant to protect her might be the very ones she needed protection from. As she finally drifted off to sleep in the early hours of morning, Isabella made a decision that would change everything. She would find a way to tell the truth, no matter how frightening the consequences might be. The weeks following Isabella's shocking discovery transformed life at Ravenshollow Palace in ways that seemed invisible to most, but felt monumental to the young princess carrying such a heavy secret. Every family dinner became an exercise in careful observation, as Isabella studied Victoria's every gesture, every smile, every casual comment for hidden meanings. The Queen Consort's public facade remained flawless, but Isabella now saw through the performance to something much more sinister underneath. Crown Prince Alexander had definitely noticed the change in his sister's behavior. As someone who had been groomed from birth to read people and situations with the analytical precision required of a future king, Alexander possessed an intuitive understanding of family dynamics that served him well in royal duties. During their traditional weekly horseback rides through the palace grounds, he began gently probing Isabella about what was troubling her. "You've been unusually quiet lately, little sister," Alexander said, as they guided their horses along the familiar path through the ancient oak grove that had sheltered royal children for generations. "Even Miss Hartwell mentioned that you seemed distracted during your lessons." Isabella gripped her reins more tightly, wrestling with the overwhelming desire to confide in her brother. Alexander had always been her protector and closest ally within the complicated dynamics of royal life. But the magnitude of what she had discovered felt too dangerous to share, even with him. "I've just been thinking about grown-up things, Alex. Sometimes palace life feels more complicated than I used to think." Alexander's expression grew more serious as he studied his sister's troubled face. At 24, he had already begun taking on significant royal responsibilities and had developed a keen sense for when something was genuinely amiss versus typical childhood concerns. Isabella, if someone has done something to upset you, or if you've seen or heard anything that worries you, you can always tell me. You know that, don't you? The directness of his question caught Isabella off guard, and for a moment she almost blurted out everything. But then she remembered Victoria's cold voice discussing making people disappear, and fear closed her throat. I know, Alex. I just need some time to figure things out on my own. Meanwhile, Victoria's activities around the palace were becoming increasingly suspicious to anyone paying close attention. She had begun hosting private meetings in her personal chambers rather than using the official reception rooms where such conversations would normally take place. Palace staff whispered about unusual visitors who arrived through service entrances rather than the main gates, and there were rumors about important documents being removed from the royal archives without proper authorization. King Edmund seemed oblivious to these changes, consumed as he was with managing a growing economic crisis that threatened the kingdom's stability. The burden of ruling during turbulent times had aged him considerably over the past year, and he relied heavily on Victoria's counsel and support. This dependence made him less likely to question her activities or notice the subtle shifts in palace atmosphere that were obvious to more observant family members. Isabella's newfound awareness extended beyond just Victoria's behavior to encompass the entire web of relationships and power structures within the palace. She began noticing which servants seemed nervous when Victoria approached, which advisors avoided making eye contact with the queen consort, and which areas of the palace had become mysteriously restricted or required special permissions to access. The Thornfield incident remained a mystery that haunted Isabella's thoughts.